So here's a quick loop with the bass sound we're going to make. Be warned, it's loud. Alright, so let's have a look at how we go about creating that in Serum, and especially this latter part where it has its own melody and sound changes without any automation. So as you can see here, it's an initialized patch in Serum, and we're going to save it now, so those of you on the Xfer Serum bass design course can have the preset and download it from this video. It's now called the DnB tear-up. So first, let's look at the two oscillators. Instead of using the sub oscillator over here, it's disabled entirely, and we're using analog BD syn, basically the most plain sine wave that there is here in Serum. If we disable everything else, including our oscillators, here's what we're left with. Right, a pretty low down subby saw line. There's some key things here. This isn't necessarily being our subline purely. We have bumped it down 1 octave and we fine-tuned it by just -6, just a little bit off, and we'll see why when we sit that with the other oscillator. If we just open up channel EQ in here, we can have a little look and see that it's generating our fundamental harmonic right around where our kick drum would maybe sit. So we'd maybe want to sit our kick up here in this particular bass line. And this fundamental just helps cut through and is the solid ear pickup for where this bass is. Everything else is kind of noise character. Today's video is sponsored by DistroKid. They let me get my music out to all of the major distributors, and they do that at a price an independent artist can easily afford. If you're ready to get your music or beats out there and want to release an unlimited amount of music each year, check the link in the description below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution with DistroKid. There's also no other control going on with this oscillator, so we can mimic those settings. There's no detune, nothing like that going on at all. If we switch on oscillator B, again, we're using a pretty basic wave. It's called the basic MCB. It's basically a saw wave. Setting wise, this goes down 2 octaves. So if we open up channel EQ, we'll now see we've got our sub harmonic here and loads of other higher harmonics, but we've still got that BD sign poking through as the key one. So our sub's coming from here, and that's why we've dropped it down 2 octaves. We've got this sign just poking through and always kind of being that enforcement of the note. Nothing technical going on. There's no unison. There's no detune happening. We're not using any of the wavetable in position either here. And the slight detuning between the two oscillators just gives us a bit more of a ripping and tearing sound. Filter here is where some of the nasty factor comes in. If we switch our filter on, got this kind of weird unpleasant sound, and that's because we've pumped this resonance right the way up to create this vicious harmonic up here in this unpleasant frequency. If we open up channel EQ again, we can see it here. But notice how it only pops through when the notes come in, and that's a key. And that's how we're getting that modulation to happen on the latter part where the notes are a lot quicker. We're doing that with LFO2, and LFO2 here is linked to the fat control. So watch. Oh, and that's causing that to pulse up and down. Now the LFO is inverted, so when the notes re-trigger, it fully opens up again and we get that harmonic poking through. So our first note has it, and then it fades away. And then they pop through again when it re-triggers each time. So we need the LFO to be synced to the BPM. In this case, it's synced over the course of 1 bar. And mode is off. We could set it to re-trigger. You get the same effect, but mode off works perfectly fine here. And it's also slightly off. It's not in the dead center here, so it takes a little longer than it should to do that cycle. So a 1 bar cycle is still a whole oscillation, but it doesn't meet perfectly in the middle, and that kind of leads just a little bit off with the sound drifting out, but snapping back in when it's re-triggered each time. And we need to make sure the LFO anchor is on as well here, because we want it to always be synced with the global position, which is what that does. Now, some key voicing factors as well in this one. Over here, we've got mono switched on, we've got legato switched on, and that's important for these first notes here that overlap. If we open it up in the piano roll, we can see here, this note triggers, and then this one triggers. By having legato and mono on, these swing one into the other. And then because we've got mono, these re-trigger despite the release. Then we can swing one into the other again at the end here. Now on my channel here, you notice I have the gain plugin as well. You might have a different option in your DAW, but in Logic, this is how we can switch something to be into mono. And now I'm going to turn this sound into mono, because in the effects section, we want to design everything so it's mono compatible and still works. So now the sound is mono. It sounds basically the same as it did before. But in the effects, we're going to apply a lot of other things. So first thing we put in here was the hyper and dimension. That's giving us a lot of our phasing and resound, right? We've also introduced unison here with a really heavy mix. This could absolutely cause phasing issues, but it allows us to get that ripping and tearing sound. If we set this up while we're in mono, we know that bass sound is still going to work in mono, and then when we do actually release it into stereo, it's going to sound pretty incredible. So we've set that up in mono, and we've got that ripping and tearing sound that we want. We've still got our horrible frequency popping out from the filter. The distortion section is going to take care of that for us. When we switch that on, we've used diode 1. I tend to like diode quite a lot in here for this kind of distortion. And we've got some modulation going on in here as well, which really plays into that factor of creating that modulation on the fast notes. So let's listen now. We've got the distortion in. And what's going on here is we've actually got the frequency moving, the distortion frequency, and that here is linked into LFO1, and you can see that here. Again, it's cycling over 1 bar, and we've got this nice little curved up option that then drops out quite quickly, and we can see the automation happening just here. Mix over here is on 100, we're hearing 100% of the distortion coming out. I've done the naughty thing and bumped up the low end, which gives this bass so much extra weight. And then, oddly enough, I've put a bunch of reverb on it, and reverb really helps solidify the sound, but the mix is being controlled here by envelope 2. You see, when we take envelope 2, we can see the mix control is going up, and it pushes up over a second. That allows the sound to develop and change a little bit on those longer notes and kind of create that room vibe. But on the faster notes, it doesn't get high enough for us to even really perceive it. Now, all of that may seem like a very subtle change in mono, but when we switch this guy here off, you're going to hear quite the difference to how we built the sound out. It's a pretty stark contrast, right? But we know everything works in mono, it still rips, it still tears, and when we go to stereo, we get that overwhelmingness. And we give ourselves some drums.